Thank you so much for being here at the Global Esports Executive Summit for this important event and even more important discussion on the future of esports. My name is Jenn, and as the Director of Global Partnerships for Women in Games International and an avid lover of video games, I am honored to be here for this important conversation. I started playing video games very young, and have always considered myself a gamer without hesitation. This year especially, I've noticed the theme of conversation in almost every industry, but especially in esports, can be summed up in one question. How do we get more women into the gaming space, especially esports? This question infiltrates all levels, all mediums, all positions, from players to the highest executive. The answer is pretty simple, though. Empower them. Empower women in esports. The solution is a little more complicated. Storytelling is the most powerful way to put ideas into the world. And when we talk about women in esports or women in gaming, we often leave out those storytelling details, the stories behind the data, behind the numbers, behind the statistics. To the question, how do we get more women into the gaming space, especially esports, can really be simplified into, where are all the women? This discourse doesn't help us, because when we're starting a story, we often ask a question. And that question can help shape the narrative of that story. So when we're asking, how do we get more women into the gaming space? How do we get more women into esports? What we're saying is, where are all the women in esports? Where are all the women in the gaming spaces? This creates the narrative that we don't exist. It's a type of erasure that our contributions to the gaming industry are not as important or not as relevant, and they become dismissed. We see this in headlines when we talk about how gamers are on the rise, making it seem like we're magical unicorns that fall from the sky. When I hear words like these, the assumption is women aren't interested in gaming, or don't play games, or at the very least are not as involved as those who identify as men in the gaming scene. But what we're missing is the story behind those statements, behind that data, behind the conversation. And asking where are all the women, we're dismissing the very work women have contributed to the video game industry since the beginning. We become so busy searching that we dismiss what's right in front of us. So the real question is, how do we shift the culture of gaming to empower women to be seen? And you may be thinking, but Jen, the data shows that women are not into esports or first-person shooters or whatever specific genre you want to throw in here. And while that may be true, the data shows us a lack of women in the gaming and STEM space. It's really the story behind the data that will help us find the answers we need to create an industry that shifts into empowerment instead of hindering women. The data doesn't give us a full picture. There just isn't enough of it yet. And I know this one conversation isn't going to fix the industry overnight. It's impossible to go over all the moving parts that got us here in one 20-minute segment. My goal for today is just to start the conversation, to use the little data that we do have, to get you thinking outside the box a little bit when it comes to bringing these statistics of women in the gaming space to a more comparable level. When it comes to empowering women in gaming and esports. My goal is to shift the conversation from where are all the women to how do we help women feel seen, heard, and accepted in the gaming industry. We do that in 4 steps. Simplified, but First step, recognition. Recognizing that women are in the industry, that we do exist, that you don't have to search for us, we're here. The second is storytelling. What narratives are we creating with our data? How can we shift those narratives to be more inclusive? The third is the language. What language are we using when we're trying to reach out to this demographic? And 4 is shifting the industry. How can we rethink the industry as it is now to make it more accepting and inclusive? Let's start with recognition. You see, women have been pioneers in the gaming industry since its very inception. Contrary to popular discourse amongst male-dominated spaces, we've been here the whole time. Maybe not in as big numbers, maybe not as many of us, but we've existed since the beginning. Let me introduce you to Mabel Addis. In 1964, 8 years before Pong was ever on anybody's radar, Mabel Addis created what can single-handedly be called the most influential game in history. And many in the industry have never even heard of her or her game. In fact, Mabel Addis wouldn't have even called herself a gamer. She was a teacher with a degree in ancient history and a master's in education who was looking for a better way to reach her students. Her game, the Sumerian game, was an interactive text simulation experience, first of its kind. When it didn't land the way she hoped, Mabel Addis created the first game patch, the first upgrade. And in that patch, she included the first ever cutscenes, audio that she had spliced over moving screenshots, like a slideshow, in order to engage the children into learning more about the first ever civilization. The Sumerian game was the first ever video game created for an electronic computer, the first game to have a patch and cutscenes, all with a woman in the driver's seat as the game's writer and level designer. She wasn't a gamer. She didn't play video games. Yet she paved the way for the industry greats that you see today. And this story kind of brings me to my point. The problem is not a lack of women wanting to be in the gaming or esports space. Women make up 46% of the gaming market as a whole. The problem is a lack of understanding in how women make consumer and content decisions when it comes to video games and esports. So let's talk about storytelling a little bit. Mabel Addis' story is very unique, very significant, and is often erased and dismissed when we talk about women in the space, especially when we're asking where are they, right? But let's look at some statistics, because data always tells a story. It's really difficult to find accurate information on women gamers, especially in esports, and even harder to find information on any other marginalized genders, even today in 2021. Well, there are many reasons for this. We can still use what little data we have to find the stories behind those statistics. Marketing can easily become cold and calculated when we focus just on the hard data alone. In a way, it takes the true meaning out of what marketing started as, and should always focus on, in my opinion. Connecting with our audiences through the art of storytelling. We can use data to find the gaps in the story, even when there is so little to go on. Let's start with this data from 2017. Survey of 13 countries, still kind of small, but focusing on gamers separated by age groups. If we look at this data, which is, again, still very small, we see some interesting stories forming. If we look over here, people 10 to 20 years old who identify as male make up about 12% of this gamer pool, while the female identifying in this group make about 10%. That's only a 2% difference between the two. If we look over here on the other end, kind of goes the other way. We see a shift in this dynamic. 8% of this gamer pool is made up of 51 to 65 years young females. 7% of this gamer pool, 51 to 65 males. A 1% difference in the other direction. Looking at the data of the 36 to 50-year-olds, we see a 2% difference between male and female identifying gamers in this pool. However, when we look at the 21 to 35-year-olds, that difference jumps to 5%. And when we factor in esports specifically, the differences can be pretty astounding. Now, there are multiple ways to look at the same data, multiple stories to tell. Marketing is all about telling stories to create community around an idea, product, or even a culture. One could look at this data and assume that women grow less interested in gaming as they pursue careers or passions or start families. However, that same story should also fall for the males in that category. And when we get to that 36 to 50 age group, it kind of balances back out again. So what are some of the reasons that we could talk about, that could influence this? Well, the biggest one that we always end up talking about as an industry is accessibility. Accessibility is the big question. And sure, accessibility is important. One cannot game without access to games. But the idea behind the story that girls are forbidden from gaming and told to focus on other things only applies to some of us. And in this data that we just looked at, these are all self-identifying gamers, people who have access. Accessibility is not quite the issue. Which means that there's more of a story to explore. I often say I was born with a controller in my hand. Born here in South Korea, my family moved back and forth, and like many of my friends in America, there were times I didn't live with my parents, but with relatives when my parents were in workspaces that I couldn't follow. One thing I always had access to was gaming. In my formative years, the thought that gaming was ever for boys never crossed my mind. At 3, I fell in love with the tech when my parents bought me this VTech Socrates education system in 1988. My father was here in South Korea working on the Olympics, and my mom and I recently reunited with him. It was love at first sight for me and this revolutionary tech, where I learned long addition with the help of a calculator, of course, and spelling with the help of my robot friend Socrates. You can see him right here. In 1990, I spent hours challenging my dad's buddies in Tetris, as my dad laughed and cheered me on. When we talk about women in games, we often talk about parents and the role parents play in encouraging their daughters to go into these spaces and careers. My parents did everything they were supposed to do in that realm. And yet I still wouldn't find my career in gaming until my early 30s. So if accessibility isn't completely the solution, then what is? Well, let's take a look at some more data. If we can dive deeper into this story, we can find some more answers. When we focus on gamers, especially women gamers, we are actually limiting ourselves tremendously as industry professionals, as hiring managers, as marketing gurus, as an outreach, right? Community management. The term gamer is often linked to specific stereotypes. And even as they evolve over the years, there's still stereotypes. Whether it's a white male living in his mom's basement or the gamer girl aesthetic of pink setups and cat ears, or even the certain games that we play that put us in that category of gamer. Whatever it is, these stereotypes end up hindering our marketing outreach and our ability to reach our communities. When we talk about gamers, we are losing sight of people who play video games and non-players as well from our potential market reach. Now remember, Mabel Addis wasn't a gamer. She wasn't a self-professed gamer. She didn't identify as a gamer. In fact, if you look in today's gaming world, 3 of 4 founders of the gamers who are making huge moves in the industry right now are not gamers. Women are less likely to take this title of gamer. In my own personal journey, I've met many women who spend hours creating amazing content in The Sims, on Animal Crossing, or adventuring with their companions in Skyrim. If you ask them if they were a gamer, they would shake their head adamantly, declaring their distance from the title, especially if they have children. This means by catering our marketing efforts to gamers, we are actually alienating a majority of women who play video games, potential players, potential industry professionals. Let's look at some more data and you'll see what I mean. In 2020, Activision Blizzard Media partnered with Alter Agents to do a survey on one of the most left out demographics in the gaming space: moms. Now, the data we're looking at is from a very small pool. Again, very new, very small amount of data. However, we can use this data to help us fill in some of this story that we're trying to find, this narrative that's being created. This survey looked at women ages 25 to 54 who had at least one child at home. And remember, ages 21 to 35 had a 5% gap in gender gaming share, according to the data we saw earlier. We also know that the median age of having children is around 26 years old. In this survey, they found that 71% of moms played video games in some capacity, whether it was PC, console, or mobile. 90% of those moms who play games played mobile games weekly. But they didn't just stop there. A majority of those moms, 53%, played cross-platform, both mobile and PC or mobile and console. And even with these high percentages of moms who play video games, less than half of them identify as gamers, even though many of them have been gaming for over a decade. And 29% of them play over 10 hours a week. But not only are we missing out on potential women who play video games by not getting in touch with this demographic is also more likely to recommend products on social media, engage with advertisement from their favorite brands, and consume and create and engage in content. They're consumers to the core and often make financial decisions in their own households globally. By narrowing our marketing tactics down to women gamers, we're leaving out not only potential applicants and participants in esports spaces, we're limiting our organic reach to women. When my friend Nikki, the one who's played every iteration of The Sims since she was 12 years old, told me she wasn't a gamer, I exclaimed how illogical that sounded. What do you mean? You play video games. You're a gamer. In her mind, a female gamer meant the pink setup, the cat ears, the gamer girl aesthetic, which she was not. Her favorite color is green. Another friend of mine never played a video game until it was suggested as visual therapy after she suffered a brain injury. And in 3 years, she was assigned Apex player. These women didn't consider themselves gamers until another woman gave them permission to do so, until they learned that they didn't need to fit an aesthetic to claim that title. So in order to empower women in the esports and gaming spaces, we also must rethink the industry as a whole. We need to look outside of gaming and lean on data that covers how women make decisions when choosing what content to engage in. So let's take a look at this data from Kearney. In their 2020 Women Consumer Survey, they tell us a story of how women view companies and make decisions on what to support. This data tells us that overall women value a female-focused product, which means catering to women's needs creates a bigger impact in their decision making, more so than showing up as a gender progressive company, more so than just showing up as representation in a male dominated space. Creating a female-centered esports product is more than just creating a playable character that is a woman. It's more than just making a same product with a pink option. Not everybody likes pink, remember? It means taking a hard look at what is considered esports, beyond the male-centric first-person shooter game, and expanding available genres in that space. And I'm not just talking about women-centered tournaments either. Even though they are a necessary step in helping create safe spaces for women and marginalized players to feel comfortable to play, they still rely on women conforming to the traditional stereotype of what it means to be a gamer, to fall in line with the male-centric, male-focused video games such as Call of Duty, or even League of Legends to a certain point. It reinforces the idea that you need to play specific games, you need to be a specific player in order to fit in that aesthetic, in order to count as a gamer. Empowering women in sports is so much more than getting more women representation. It's so much more than just changing the language or just creating more inclusive environments that tap into that organic reach. It's all of it. It's everything, all together, all in one. We must also think about what is considered esports. How can we shift that definition to be more inclusive of games that women tend to gravitate towards? It's not enough to just throw money at marketing campaigns catered to women gamers. And this is where those stories we talked about come in handy. We know women who play games do not identify as gamers. We know women who play games don't necessarily play games like Apex Legends or League of Legends or Overwatch. We know that mobile games are much more appealing. We know that match 3 games are much more appealing. Candy Crush tournaments. What else could we tap into if we created esports spaces that catered around The Sims or Animal Crossing or Pokemon Go? We know women who play video games also play cross-platform. But the real conclusion to all of this is that we already know women who play video games. And we already know women who work in the industries. And we already know women whose hard work and dedication are at the backbone of this industry. So let's stop erasing them. And let's start empowering them. Thank you.